Hello, everybody. It's my pleasure to speak to you today about a personal point of view that I've called Web3 for Enterprises, business model for the new internet. And you might be wondering why I've got a picture of a marketplace on my cover slide. Well, that's because I think what we're talking about is a new digital or data economy, buying and selling of data to support the next generation of machine learning, deep learning, and AI applications. So just two things to know about me. First of all, I'm now retired. So I'm talking to you today because I want to, and because I'm very interested in this topic. And secondly, I have spent the last 6 years doing nothing else other than enterprise blockchain. So let's talk about the problem, the context for this talk. Well, I think that our generation and the generations to come are being tasked with solving a whole load of new problems. How are we going to stop putting plastic bottles into the ocean? And how can we create sustainable and circular economies? How are we going to put an electric car on every driveway when we don't have the infrastructure to support the charging of those cars? How are we going to create carbon neutral supply chains? And it's my opinion and this point of view that the only way we can fix those problems is by changing consumer behavior in a economy that is governed by the technology, by smart contracts. And we're seeing three technologies come together here as we have the behavioral change and the economics of our blockchain. We have the data as fuel to drive deep learning and AI. And as we move towards this new machine-to-machine economy driven by the Internet of Things. So I think this is our context for the token economy, which is another way of describing Web3. So I think there are three big reasons why this is interesting, but there are three big challenges why this is hard to achieve. The first is, well, I think we've got actually two options for how we can solve this next generation of problems. We can either go down the situation of winner takes all, and we can end up with a few very large cloud and AI companies, or my preferred model would be a collaborative model where we say, well, no one party has all the data needed to solve these problems. So we need to collaborate, we need to share data to solve these problems. But the downside of that is there's going to have to be some recognition. You're going to lose a little bit of control over the business model, perhaps, and over your data in particular. So we have to overcome that, the governance model. From the consumer's point of view, this is much fairer. We're used to a Facebook style of model in Web2 where the consumer has been monetized. Well, the youngsters coming through do not like that model. Thank you very much. And are very unenthusiastic to repeat it. So there's a lot of demand for a lot fairer model where you own your identity and you own your data on the internet. But the downsides to this, the trade-off here is this is going to be harder to create a delightful consumer user experience and ease of use. So we have to overcome that. And then finally, we are getting the programmability of our business model, the autonomous nature of our business model, as we move into a world where we can clear and settle at the same time, in the same place, in microtransactions. Now, that's hugely transformative because we're now settling in 10 minutes rather than 5 days. We're now able to drive very small transactions as the cost of a payment tends towards the cost of an email. So we can do lots of these very, very small payments as we're charging for access to data sets. The downside of that is that we have to solve the problem of volatility between fiat and crypto. And we have to create the regulatory environment where everyone is comfortable to work within this new emerging economy. If I think about that market opportunity, well, let's look at the axes. I think there are two drivers to the market opportunity. The first is network effects and synergies. So who is on the network? It's very lonely to trade with yourself. We're building marketplaces here. So we want more people, not less, on the marketplace. And we want to be able to reuse components. So if I built a utility for payments or for financing or for providing liquidity or price discovery in markets, I want to be able to reuse that. So you innovate on top of pre-built building blocks. So we have to have network effects and synergies. Now, on the bottom axis, we have the level of decentralization or control. And particularly in the B2B space, you're probably going to want to start off quite small with just your friends in a much more controlled environment where you can start to improve the quality of the data which you're going to tokenize and take into this new world economy. So you probably start off quite centralized, actually. But as you open up the valve and become more decentralized, this is where we can start to tokenize that data. So we can now exchange value and ownership at the same time at great velocity. And we can start to think about this buying and selling of access to data sets at high velocity. And we're driving increased liquidity, obviously. But then finally, as we open up the valve all the way, we now are starting to solve problems at the level of the economy, at the level of a zone of regulation, at the level of the internet. So we now need to be fully decentralized to have the incentives for everybody to want to play on this network. And this is where we start to solve those new generational problems that we've been tasked with. Now, technically, if I think about how this might work, well, we have three major layers in our architecture. So we have our user interface, which is where you hold access to your tokens in your wallet. And there are three types of tokens that you'll, at the highest level, that you'll have. Something to do with your identity, and this may be a credential or it may be a token. Something to do with so ownership and control of things that you own, be they fungible or non-fungible, and money, which you can use by way of value exchange. So this is where you hold your keys. In the middle, we have the smart contracts. So this is where we codify those autonomous models, both the business models for buying and selling, trading, but also the business model for governing and making decisions. And then we're storing the results of that on our blockchain. So this is where we have a decentralized source of the truth of who owns what and who has done what to what. If we extend that out a little bit, that same model out a little bit, you can see we've got our wallet with our three tokens at the top. One thing that's super important is that we are now establishing identity, we are now establishing ownership, we are now establishing digital money effectively at the level of the internet. So in the past, you have to recreate your identity every time you go into a new website, every time you go onto a new platform. Now, this is portable across the internet. So I think we're going to start to see industries starting to blur, the boundaries are going to start to blur. So as we start to look at some of those use cases, let's think about maybe electric vehicles. Well, here we see electric vehicles, the automotive industry coming together with the energy industry as we look at charging your battery in your car, as we look at trading energy peer-to-peer, as perhaps you have excess energy which you can sell back to the grid. And you may be even integrating with other industries like healthcare, for example. How are we going to support disabled drivers, perhaps to access charge points and to charge their car when they're out and about? So there's going to be these new AI-driven autonomous applications And they'll be supported by a whole bunch of reusable economic utilities around things like establishing identity, establishing provenance, establishing or trading and executing a payment or a financing, about tokenizing real world data and making it available to smart contracts, and about driving incentives to change behavior. Our logic will also cover our governing model, for example, around how we vote to make decisions, how we're going to handle the reserve fund as we look to balance the volatility of crypto to fiat. And all of this is going to be based around the native token to our community. So this could be health money, energy money, Volkswagen money, depending on what is the basis of your community. So you have your native token, which you're using to, and this token could well be pegged to fiat. So it's effectively a US dollar or a euro or a GBP. And then at the bottom, we have our ledgers where we're storing the state of our assets. And of course, this could be in a permissioned or a permissionless world. So how might this decentralized autonomous organization work? Well, we're creating a marketplace. Another way to think of a marketplace is a bit like a vending machine. You put a token in and you get something out. So there's your exchange. You could be getting out access to a data set, perhaps controlled by an NFT. You could be perhaps be getting a service supported by an application. The money which we're using, the value, will have been onboarded from fiat. We have our reserve fund to control the volatility. And we want to keep that in a closed loop inside the economy. We don't want it to leak out and be converted back into fiat. So we want to be creating lots of services, lots of applications to create a bigger marketplace of buyers and sellers to keep our token locked in. We will be building utilities to drive the buying and selling, as perhaps we drive liquidity pools, as we drive pricing, price discovery, as we support the various economic utilities. And of course, we'll be voting. So this is the core model. And if I start to visualize some of the value flows within our core model, we have our various actors. And our actors operate at the level of the wallet, the consumer, at the level of the market in the middle, or at the level of the ledger on the right. Our wallet contains our 3 tokens around who I am, the stuff I can trade, and the money I can use in exchange. We have those who are selling access to their data to drive this innovation, those who are buying access to that data, perhaps for internal use or perhaps to build their applications. We have our utilities to establish identity, provenance, and drive payment and finance so that we can create the data exchange to drive the new applications. If, for example, we think of one value flow, so perhaps I'm the consumer, I'm putting value in to buy access to a service, and that value is going to be split between the owner of the data, the builder of the application, and the processor of the transactions in the ledger. And we may also need to be incentivizing helpful behavior of other economic actors in our community. So we can build a series of value flows to fairly divide the value up amongst the actors in a fair win-win-win model. Now, if I think, well, where are we going to start? Perhaps in that automotive example, well, clearly we're going to have to build those utilities around identity. We're going to have to establish the identity of the vehicle. We're going to have to know about what's in the vehicle. For example, its battery, where does it come from? What type of battery does it have? Most cars are leased, so we're going to have a good set of data around interacting with the leasing community. We're going to want to be perhaps tokenizing ownership of cars, as perhaps electric cars are so expensive, perhaps they become a business. So you hire, rather than your car sitting for 24 hours on your, for 20 hours on your drive doing nothing, that downtime you can hire out to friends and family, perhaps, or to people with a high reputation to turn your car into a business. And then finally, we need that car e-wallet. So a wallet inside the car itself, actually, where it can hold those tokens and the car itself can drive the transactions. So that then is my quick 15 or 20-minute introduction to Web3 for enterprises, a new business model for the internet. This is just an introduction. These are some of the key slides that come from a book that I'm currently writing, which takes these concepts into a lot more detail with a lot more examples and detail behind that. So I'd like to stop at that point, and we can just stop the meeting now. Thank you.